episode 4. Um, so I promise I am trying to be better about doing videos more regularly. But yeah, so we've made some progress. So I got the entire front suspension removed off of the truck, and we've started doing the fabrication side now. So we've got all the factory stuff that was mounted here is gone. It's been cut off and ground smooth. We welded in a block-off plate. This comes with the Bibani coilover conversion. So thank you, Jason. That makes my life a lot easier. I didn't have to make it. But yeah, so this gets welded in just to kind of add the strength back to your lower control arm mount on the frame. And so that's all done. And then we got the lower control arms. These are brand new. They're $30 on Rock Auto, or maybe $32. It was so cheap. It was like, why on earth would I buy, or try to make use of the old rusty stock ones? The original ones, they had a little rust. Nothing like structural or dangerous, but I mean, they were probably the OEM struts from 200 and some thousand, lower control arms that have like 200 and some thousand miles on them. For $30, I'd rather just start off with something fresh. So I think those are made by Delphi, so they're a decent brand. And they came with new ball joints in the bottom, so you don't have to do the whole pressing it in and pressing it out nonsense. So put these in, and then I gotta say too, you won't really be able to see it on this because I can't move it enough, but I've got the other one here which I haven't finished yet. I'm currently setting it up so that I can weld on the other arm. But Road Fab, great guy by the way. If you ever need anything for an old mini truck, like fabrication parts, check out roadfab.com. He builds some really awesome stuff, and his prices are like super reasonable. So for like $35, I got these really nice plates. These match up perfectly like that, and you weld that in. And really what it's doing is it's just kind of adding some extra strength. Since this whole conversion, we're asking this arm to do like a whole lot more than it was originally designed to do. Now the entire weight of the truck, or at least the front of the truck, which, to be frank, is most of the weight of the truck, is going to be mounted, or like resting right here, because the coilover is getting mounted there. Where previously this was just a shock, not a lot of strain being put on this part. So I thought reinforcing it, while it's probably not strictly necessary, it's also not a bad idea. For $35, that's extremely cheap insurance to know that this thing is going to be good. So went ahead and did that. That gets welded onto the bottom of this thing, and then I'll be putting the other arm just to match that side on the side here. And then with Bibani Customs kit, they give you these. This is kind of like a little thin mount here. And what this is designed to do, for the same reason, since this is not originally designed to handle this kind of weight, you're supposed to just kind of weld this onto the side of that shock tower there, or shock mount rather, so that it can support the weight of the coilover. However, the problem with that is that the coilover ends up being kind of very, very straight up and down, and so it can create some clearance issues with the upper control arm. I don't know what you kind of want to call it, but like the base of it, basically. So what some people have said to do online, and I think it's a really good idea, is to move that coilover out a little bit. And so, because Jason Pope is a badass and has thought of these things, he sends you with these fatter ones. This is like 1/4 inch thick steel. And so what I'll be doing is cutting this off and probably cutting off the sway bar mount here. And then this gets welded on, I haven't decided where yet, I'm going to look at it, but a little bit further down. Now the problem with this is, the arm is going to sit kind of at a little bit of a downward slant, and you can kind of see here, it makes the strut tower, the coilover gets mounted a little lower. So it technically lowers the truck even more. For a lot of people, that's a benefit. For me, that's a problem. This truck it's got some stuff underneath it, like the exhaust and the oil pan that sits a little lower than I feel comfortable, as far as like putting this thing really low. So what I'm going to do is I've got some 1/4 inch steel here that I'm going to weld onto the bottom of that, which will just kind of kick it back up again and sort of put it in more or less the same location it was originally, so that hopefully I can move the strut tower out, I keep saying strut tower, the coilover. I can move the coilover out a little bit, but not get any lower, that coilover is going to go low enough. Like I'm probably going to be running it at like the maximum height. So that's not a problem for me. So that's going to get welded on. I got to do that to both sides once I figure out the position of that. But before I can do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to mount the coilover in here kind of loose without the spring. So just kind of a temporary thing going up to the top mount here. And what I want to do before I weld on, by the way, this is the part that gets welded to the inner part of the frame for the lower control arm relocation kit. That's this part here, made by Roadfab as well. But in any case, before I can weld this in, I want to make sure I have enough caster adjustment. So I can kind of maneuver this a little bit before I weld it into place permanently. So I'm going to kind of check that. Talking to the alignment shop that's going to do the alignment on this once I'm finished, which, by the way, it's SCR Performance in Loveland, Colorado. Really, really cool guys there. They've actually kind of been like helping me over the phone understand alignment settings a little bit more. This is going to have a little bit more of a performance-oriented alignment on it. It's a toy. I'm not driving it every day. So what I'm really trying to do is make this thing handle well. So I kind of talked to him for a little while, and I said, hey, what are some things I can do when I'm setting up the suspension that will contribute to better handling? And particularly because this part gets welded to the frame, and then this heim joint here is how you adjust your caster after you install this kit. It makes your caster a whole lot more adjustable than it would be from the factory, so that's awesome. However, the bummer of it is the only way to adjust the caster is to unbolt the lower control arm, unbolt the caster arm, and unbolt your coilover, and remove that whole thing, spin this thing to the position you think you want it, put it back in, and check it. That's like a whole lot of work. And I'm going to be paying SCR Performance like basically per hour to do the alignment because it's a performance-oriented alignment on a performance suspension. That's not going to be a $70 alignment or something. So to save myself a little bit of money and hopefully to save them a little bit of headache, I'm going to try to get my caster set up ahead of time. And part of that is I want to make sure before I weld everything into place permanently that there's enough adjustment in this system to get the alignment that I want. From talking to them, they said that basically you want as much caster as you can possibly pull off. So he said a good performance alignment is going to have anywhere from 4 to 7 degrees of caster, where like an average car is going to be like 3 to 5. So he said Porsches have like 9 degrees of caster. I probably won't be able to achieve that. But basically, he said get as much caster into this system as you possibly can. That way, when you're going through turns, as your wheel turns, you lose your camber. And if you have more caster, you keep that camber and your tires stay planted firmly on the ground. So I'm going to do a little bit of playing with this to see just how much caster I can squeeze out of it before I lock it down. Then that'll get welded into place. The other thing that hasn't been finish welded because I just kind of want to make sure everything is in the right spot are the upper strut. I keep saying struts. They're kind of struts. Coilovers. Serving the same purpose, right? But in any case, so these are just tacked into place. The way that I did that is this little tool here. I got this on Amazon for $30 and stuck it on a really cheap tripod that I normally use to hold my microphone for my videos. But what this thing is it's an auto-leveling laser. So we can turn that on just like that, and it casts a perfectly level line this way and a perfectly straight up and down line this way, which is like really cool for $30. So we used this. I mean, it's not in the right place right now because obviously what you need to do is you need to make sure that this is perfectly in line with the strut. But we basically used this to get both of the coilovers in exactly the same location from side to side. And the way you do that is you level the frame based on the position of the bottom of the frame. It needs to be level from side to side and then front to back. I goofed. It's not a big deal, but I leveled it from side to side. And then in the process of leveling it front to back, somehow the side to side thing got knocked off of alignment. And so right now the truck is sitting, I think, a quarter of an inch. I think it's a quarter of an inch taller on the left side. I can't remember. It doesn't matter. All the measurements are done already. But in any case, or no, not a quarter of an inch. I'm sorry, an eighth of an inch. It's an eighth of an inch higher on one side than the other, which doesn't make a huge difference. But when you're trying to position these, we noticed we're like, why are these not the same? But we figured it out, and once you know that, it's not a big deal if you're not perfectly bang on. If you know the amount that you're off by, you can just make sure you bake in that amount when you're doing your measurements. You just got to make sure you're keeping that in the back of your mind. If it's an eighth of an inch high on one side, remember to compensate by an eighth of an inch when you're mounting the thing, and you'll still be fine. But in any case, so those are tacked in. We're going to finish weld those. They don't actually need to be perfectly straight up and down. I talked to Jason about it from Bibani Customs, and he said it's really not all that important. There's enough play, and there's like little, almost like a Heim joint. It's kind of like a little mini joint that comes on the coilovers, and they've got enough take in them that even if you're off by a fair amount, they'll still be okay. But it's my frame. You know, once I finish welding this in place, it's not going to be a simple thing to remove. So I'd rather make sure that when it's welded on, you know, exactly the same left to right. And that way I don't have to do it again. Plus, who knows what it would do if it was off? I don't know. Maybe it makes left-hand turns feel weird. Or I don't know. I'd rather it be straight and not have to find out the hard way. So that's basically in the right spot. We just need to finish weld that in. Once that's done, we get these weird little Yodas. I mean, it looks kind of like Yoda. That gets welded in right there just to kind of fill in the space that was left from being cut off of the stock suspension. And then most of the frame fabrication is done. However, I am adding a step that I don't think I've seen anybody else do. These are universal bump stops by Energy Suspension. I haven't quite figured out exactly how I'm going to do this yet, but I really want to have some kind of a bump stop on this thing. Mostly because, you know, if you're going down the road and let's say you hit a pothole and it's a doozy. What would normally happen is there's like what Jason was telling me is that there's a bump stop kind of built into the coilover, and if you hit a bump and this jerks up, all the energy of that hit is going to go directly into your coilover. And those coilovers are not the beefiest things in the world. So he says that it'd be fine, and there's a ton of guys out there that are running them, you know, just fine that as is. But I think that the odds of you bending a coilover, it's at least not zero, right? So these, I'm going to try to figure out where I'm going to be able to mount these. I haven't quite landed on this yet, so that might be a future episode. But I kind of want these to just absorb some of that energy, so the coilover isn't the only thing stopping the suspension from going too far. But yeah, so those are going to get welded in. And then the other thing that we're going to tackle today is before I weld this plate on, I also want to put in new bushings. I highly recommend doing this. These bushings, this is the bushing, by the way, that goes right here, the lower control arm. These are a booger to replace. I've been watching a bunch of videos on it, and pretty much the universal thing that everybody says is that this job sucks. But there's a few ways you can do it. You can drill out the rubber and put in Energy Suspension makes like a polyurethane version that goes in there. So you can do that. I think I'm going to stick with stock, mostly because in order to adjust this, what you're going to have to do is move this to whatever position you want, and then you've got to kind of like manually bend that bushing to bolt everything back up. So if I put in a super stiff bushing, I feel like that job is going to become just awful. So I think I'd actually rather have the stock rubber. Everything else in this whole suspension system is going to be like Heim joints and stuff where there's no real play. So having a tiny bit of rubber as, you know, a little bit to absorb some of the rougher parts of the road, I actually think might be good. So at least it'll make the truck ride a little nicer. So we're going to do that. So that gets put on. That way this is straight. And the main reason you're doing that is, aside from the fact that I would imagine most of these bushings are just kind of worn out at this point, mine is actually in pretty good shape. However, when I was staring at it, I noticed that it's no longer perfectly centered. Because it's had the weight of the truck on it, the rubber has kind of developed a little bit of memory. So on the top of it, it's kind of bulged out a little bit, and on the bottom, it's kind of, caved in a little bit, and you can see that the center of that bushing is kind of offset slightly. And so I was like, if I put that in and then I weld the mount in place right here, I'm essentially setting up my suspension settings on worn out rubber. I'd rather have it be new and fresh so that everything is nice and straight before I lock everything down into place. I mean, there's a lot of adjustments, so you could compensate either way, but like, I want this to be like a brand new OEM truck. Everything is set with OEM new specs, and then, those will go out of alignment a little bit as it wears, but that's okay. I'd rather at least have it fresh to begin with. So that's getting installed. And then once that's done and this plate is welded into place, we're going to set up, I think I'd mentioned this before, we're going to set up the caster as close as I can get it to where I actually want it right away, because this is going to be such a pain in the butt to set up since you have to unbolt it every time. So I bought this little guy. This is really cool. This is an angle finder, and so it's got a little magnetic bottom to it. I don't know if you probably won't be able to see it if I do that. There we go. And then you can set it in whatever place, and then you can hit the button and zero it out, like that. And then as you adjust, it'll tell you what angle you're at. So we're going to try to bake in as much caster as I can possibly manage into this lower control arm, just for handling purposes. So I'm gonna try to get as much as I can, and then I'll kind of let you guys know what that ended up being. And as long as it's the same from side to side, and I've got as much caster as I can pull off, the alignment shop says they can pretty much work with it. It shouldn't be a problem. They're not going to have to unbolt everything each time, and I have to pay a ton of money per hour, So that's the plan. This is $30 on Amazon. It's a pretty cool little device. I guess I probably need to get back to work, to be honest with you. I have a whole lot to do. I got to finish building this arm and start working on the struts and getting the suspension kind of set up. We are getting a lot closer to being able to put weight on this thing, though. This side here, once I get this finish welded, there's enough there that if I were to put a strut in place, it would support the weight of the truck. So that's pretty exciting. I've got a fair amount of work left. So I better get to it. Alrighty, thanks for watching, guys.